Okay, we continue with our daily Gemara share. Baruch Hashem, we're at home, so we're going to experiment doing the share from here. And we hope that everybody's safe. We hope your family is safe, and all those who need to get well should get well. And let's get into it. So we are on Kuf Zayin Amud Beis. We are 107b. Considering that we are home, we have some extra participants. This is Chaim. Okay, well, Kuf Zayin Amud Beis, 107b, we are at the Mishnah. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, the Talmud is structured that the Mishnah is the primary text for the Mishnaic age, in which is collated all of our tradition of the oral Torah, and then there's the Gemara which comments. So we concluded the Gemara's commentary on the last Mishnah, which was some, how many pages is it? Some 17 pages ago was the first Mishnah, and we had 17 pages of commentary and 150 or so classes going through that Gemara's commentary on the Mishnah. And essentially the Mishnah there said that every Jew has a share in the world to come, gave a few exceptions, and the last 17 pages of the Gemara essentially was an analyzation of, first, what is the world to come, what is the Messianic era, what is the resurrection of the dead, which is the ultimate world to come. And then we went through each of the exceptions and analyzed them in detail. Now, the Mishnah is going to do a similar thing, but this time we're going to be discussing not individual people, but generations, or in one case, a group of people. So not just individual people, but a group of people discussing the fact that they've lost in the share in the world to come, why, how, and there's going to be one interesting distinction in that when we talked about the individuals in the previous Mishnah, it just said straight up they lost their share in the world to come. But when it comes to the generations or these groups, the Mishnah is going to divide between losing your share in the world to come and judgment. So essentially there are two elements in that future time. When the resurrection happens, there is the judgment element, something which we talked about a bit in earlier pages. Body and soul judged together, so there's judgment. And then after judgment, there is the world to come. So which presumably means that a person goes through a judgment, and then if a person needs some sort of cleansing, they'll go through that, and then they'll get their share in the world to come. That is the Messianic era of the resurrection of the dead. But here, we're going to distinguish in that some generations will get judgment, but not the share in the world to come. Whereas others will lose both, neither judgment nor share in the world to come. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go along. And at the conclusion of this, hopefully we're going to speak about what this means in our personal lives and our personal relationship with Hashem. Is that better, Chaim?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are 5 lines from the bottom of the page. You'll see the big bold words, Masnisan, our Mishnah. Dair HaMabel, the generation of the flood. Of course, we all know the story of the flood, right at the beginning of Exodus. 10 generations or so after God creates the world, the world generates into debauchery, and God, as it were, regrets having created the world, and therefore that entire generation is wiped out with a flood. So this is the first generation that we're citing as Ein Lahem Chelek L'Mahaba. They have no share in the world to come. In addition, they don't even make it to judgment, which would mean at the moment of the flood, when they were washed off the earth, they also were cast out of the system, as it were, and they don't even return for a judgment. Whatever divine retribution or divine cleansing they needed, they got, and that was it. They're off the chart. They don't return, not for judgment, and certainly not for their share in the world to come. Shenemar, as the verse reads, La yadin ruchi ba'adam la'olam. This is a verse which is at the beginning of the description of the world degenerating into debauchery, in which God says, I will not put my spirit within man forever. The simple reading is, as would appear from Rashi's commentary on the Gemara, on the verse there, is that God is saying that man cannot live too long and carry my divine energy that's in it, because man will eventually degenerate into negative behavior, and therefore people cannot live too long. And this is the reality. Before the flood, people lived for 1,000 years, or hundreds of years, and after the flood, we don't live that long for this reason, because man cannot live for so long. We have free choice, and free choice has the potential for amazing greatness, and free choice also has the potential for, God forbid, the opposite. And God's saying, my spirit, that idea of free choice can't last for too long. But the Gemara here reads it a little bit differently and takes these two words, Loi, there won't be, Yadun, and Ruchi. and translates the word yodin, not that I won't place my spirit in man, but rather lo yodin, there won't be any judgment. And that's what the Gemara is about to say. Lo din v'lo ruach, not judgment, and no spirit, as in they do not enjoy the share in the world to come. That's the first generation here listed as those who lost their share in the world to come. The next, says the Gemara, the Mishnah is Dor HaFlaga, the generation of the Haflaga. That's the generation after the flood, sometime later when the people got together and they built the Tower of Babel and they wanted to wage war with God, as it were. And the verse there describes how they were given different languages and they were dispersed across the earth. And says the Mishnah here, Eilim Chelek Haba, this generation too loses their share in the world to come. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Vayafas Hashem Oisam Misham Al Pnei Kol Haaretz. There, from that location where they built that Tower of Babel, God dispersed them throughout the land. And then it says, Misham Efitzim, and from there he spread them out. So why the double expression? The redundancy. So comments the Gemara, comments the Mishnah, Vayifas Hashem Oisam, God spread them out, but has in this physical world. They were spread off the earth. And Misham Efitzim, the second verse, which reads again, that from there they were dispersed. These are both verses in Genesis 11, 8 and 9. That second time where it says, and God spread them out again, Leilam Haba means in the world to come, and in that they lost their share in the world to come. So that's the second generation that lost their share in the world to come. Now the third is not a generation, rather a group of people. They are Anshe Sodom, says the Mishnah, Ein Lehem Chelek Haba. Anshe Sodom are the people of Sodom. Avram Avinu, Avram Avinu's nephew Lot lives there, and Avram takes Lot out. God instructs that Lot be taken out through the angels. I'm sorry, not Avram, but Avram negotiates or tries to negotiate with God to try to save those people, that city, unsuccessfully, and the city is destroyed. So says the Gemara here, that group of people, that city, don't have the share in the world to come. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Va'anshe Sodom. This is a verse. This is a verse in Genesis 13:13. Va'anshe Sodom, the people of Sodom, Royim, were wicked, v'chatayim, and sinners laHashem, unto God. Ma'oid, very much. So says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, the double expression again, wicked and sinners. Royim b'olam haza, wicked in this world, v'chatayim b'olam haba, and sinners in the world to come. But on bedin, they do rise up in judgment. They do get judged, but not the share in the world to come. Now, actually, the phraseology here in the Mishnah is quite interesting. There are sinners in the world to come. What does that mean, there are sinners in the world to come? In the world to come, there are no sinners. So the Marsha, classic commentary on the Gemara, explains that the word chatayim, sinners, could also mean chesaron, in that they lacked. So meaning to say that they're in the world to come, but they don't get it at the highest level. And that's kind of how he understands. It would seem that's how he understands when the Mishnah said that they lose their share in the world to come, but they still get judgment. It means that they are judged and therefore get a lesser world to come, but they're still there. That's the way the Marsha understands it, and that's how we can read it on a simple level. Another option he gives, that they actually completely, fully lose their world to come, and standing in judgment means judgment for punishment. So two options, the Marsha. Lose their share in the world to come completely, rise up for judgment means judgment for punishment. And other option, the Marsha, is that they get up for judgment, and because of that judgment, they get a lesser share in the world to come. And therefore, chatayim, but they are sinners in the world to come. But chatayim, not sinners, but chatayim means those who lack, those who don't get the complete, full experience of the world to come. But Rabbi Chemya says, Elu ve'elu, both the people of Sodom and the generation of the Haflag, the generation that was dispersed, the generation of the Tower of Babel, of Babel, who tried to rise up and fight God, as we described earlier, neither of those are put in judgment. So in other words, everybody agrees that the generation of, with respect to the flood, there was no dispute. Everybody agrees that the people of the flood lose their share of the world to come and don't get judgment. With respect to the generation of the Tower of Babel, Rabbi Nechem is of the view, everybody agrees there as well that there is no share in the world to come and no judgment. When it comes to the people of Sodom, here we have a dispute. The original statement was, the original opening Tana, the Tana Kama as it's referred to, the first sage, said that they don't have a share in the world to come, but they do get judgment. Either judgment means judgment for punishment or judgment for a lesser share in the world to come, as we just described from the Marsha. Whereas the Nehemiah says, no world to come, no judgment, completely cut out, just like the people of the previous two groups. The previous two groups, the people of the flood and the people of the Tower of Babel. Now, Rabbi Chami quotes a verse to prove this idea. As the verse reads, this is a verse in Tehillim 1:5. Al kain lo yakumu rishayim. Therefore, the wicked shall not rise up in mishpat in judgment, v'chatoyim and sinners, but ada tzadikim amongst the group of the righteous. So there's double expression. The wicked don't get up in judgment, and the sinners are not amongst the group of the righteous, or the congregation of the righteous. So therefore, the comments of the Mishnah, Al kain lo yakumu rishayim, the first part of the verse which says, and therefore the wicked shall not rise up in mishpat in judgment, zed doy hamabel. This refers to the generation of the flood, losing their share in the world to come, or not even in judgment. And the chatoyim and sinners, ba'adat tzadikim, the second half of the verse which reads that sinners will not be amongst the righteous. Elu anshis them. This refers to the people of Sodom, and therefore neither Sodom nor the generation of the flood rise up in judgment in Rabbi Chemi's view, whereas the earlier position was the position of the sages, the position of the original view, the dissenting view. The original opinion was that the people of Sodom lose their share in the world to come, but they do rise up in judgment. Now, how does the original view explain this verse? This verse seems to imply that there is no judgment for the wicked, and in addition, no sinners arise with the tzaddikim, with the righteous. So Amar Loi, the sages said back to him, those who are of the view that the people of Sodom do get judgment, Einam Omdim Ba'ad Tzaddikim, the verse says that the sinners do not rise up with the group of the righteous. So that's true, says this view. They don't rise up with the group of the righteous. Aval Omdim Ba'ad Shasharim, they do rise up with amongst the group of sinners, meaning to say they do get judgment, even if their judgment is not amongst the righteous. Now the next line comes in parentheses, and I imagine the reason is because it seems to be redundant. Actually, not exactly. Well, let's see. So the parentheses reads like this: Meraglim, the spies. These are the spies that Moses sent into Israel. They were supposed to come back and report and say what's the best way to conquer the land. But instead of just telling the Jews how to conquer the land, they actually came back and gave a negative report and saying we cannot do it, which is not what they were told to do. They were told to just come back and say what's the best way to conquer the land. But instead they gave their own opinion in saying we can't do it. And this display of lack of faith led the Jews to be wandering the desert for all those time, for 40 years, until that generation completely passed away, and the next generation with Joshua went into the land of Israel. These are the 12 spies with the exception of Yeshua and Caleb, who did go into the land of Israel. Yeshua leading them and Caleb also a kind of leader. So Meraglim, the spies, also lose their share in the world to come. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Vayamusu Anoshim, and the people died, Moitzik Dibas Haaretz Ra b'Ma'gefa Lefnei Hashem. Those who spread bad words about the land, they died in a plague before God. So again, a double expression. They died, and then again in a plague. So therefore, the Gemara comments, Mishnah comments, Vayamusu, they died, in the physical world, b'Ma'gefa, in a plague, in the world to come, implying that they're cast off and they'll lose their share in the world to come. The next statement is Dar HaMidbar, not just the Meraglim, but the entire generation. And that's why I think the previous lines is in parentheses, because the previous line speaks of the spies, and the next line speaks of the generation of those who were in the desert with Moshe. Now that generation includes the Meraglim also, unless the previous statement follows the other view, which comes later, perhaps. Let's see. So, next statement is Dar HaMidbar, the generation of those who were in the desert, that generation that we just described that wandered for 40 years in the desert until they all passed away. They also lost their share in the world to come. And they don't rise up in judgment. So Shneimar, as the verse reads, in this desert they shall die, and there they shall die. Again, a double expression. Double expression, once for this world and once for the world to come. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi says, of these, the verse reads in Tehillim 55, Isfuli, gather into me, Chasidoi, my pious ones, Koise Brisi Ale Zavach, Ale Zavach, the ones who made the covenant with me. So the generation that made the covenant with God, those who were at the Mount Sinai, the verse reads, they shall be gathered in. So even though they sinned and they didn't make it into the land of Israel, but when Mashiach comes, when the resurrection happens, they will be gathered in, as is first implied, that those who were there at the time of the covenant are gathered in by Hashem. Now finally, the last group that we discuss here today is Adas Korach, those who joined Korach's rebellion against Moshe in the desert. Eina Asida Lalois will not emerge in the future time. Emerge from the pit that they were sunken into, as described there in the Torah. Shenemar, the verse reads, "Batachas aleim haaretz." The verse is in Deuteronomy, the Midbar Tezayin Lam Gimel, Deuteronomy 16:36. Tachas aleim haaretz, the world covered upon them. Ba'olam haz, in this world. And then the verse continues, "Vayavedu mitoch hakahal," and they were lost from amongst the congregation. La'olam haba, this refers to the world to come. Again, the double expression implying lost in this world and lost in the world to come. Divri Rabbi Akiva, these are words of Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Lezer disagrees and says, "Aleim ho'im," this the verse says, "Hashem memes," God puts to death, u'machaya, and God revives. Moedet she'oil, God puts those down into the depths, the bowels of purgatory. Vayal, and He rises them up, meaning that this generation, this group of people who were killed and were put into she'oil, put into the depth, put into this pit, they will rise up. Okay, so to perhaps understand on a personal spiritual level what this means when we say that the generation of the flood loses their share on the world to come and do not rise up in judgment, whereas other generations do get up in judgment. Like, for example, the group of Sodom. The group of Sodom is said that there's a dispute whether the city of Sodom rises up in judgment or not. And likewise, there is a dispute with respect to the people of the desert, Korach, and the people of the desert in general, whether or not they lose their share in the world to come or not. So perhaps it means something like this. We know that the Mabul, the flood, the way Chassidus understands it, is like a big mikveh, that the world had to be completely purified, submerged under water, spiritually speaking, and therefore completely cleansed and start again. So if that's the case, this refers to, spiritually speaking, a Jew who may have lost his way, like the people of the generation of the flood, lost their way. No, let's just say we look at a person as a microcosm of the entire universe. So the Jew, at an individual level, can experience all of the things that the world on the grand scale went through. So if a Jew, God forbid, goes through a stage where he degenerates to the point that is like the generation of the flood, so what happens to him is he can go through a process of cleansing in which teshuvah makes him into a new person. Rambam says that after teshuvah, the person who is a new person and the one who did the sin is not him. And therefore it's wiped clean. So that in that sense, we can actually give a positive spin on this idea that there's no share in the world to come and no judgment. The reason why there's no share in the world to come and there's no judgment is because the you that emerged after the flood, the Jew that emerges after the mikveh, after the complete purification of teshuvah, is a new you. It's a new person. And as a new person, there's no reason to judge your past behavior because it's a new person emerged. Whereas Sodom is only one element of me, and that kind of behavior needs to be cut out. And therefore there is a judgment. The judgment, at least according to one view, that judgment is to cut out that negative behavior. In other words, there are times when a person looks at themselves and they see that they have to do a restart. I need to restart here. I have to go through a flood stage. I have to go through a stage of complete immersion and rebirth and come out as a new person. When a person goes through that kind of metamorphosis in a positive sense, then their past behavior, not even judgment, because there's nothing to judge. There's a new person emerges. But then when the person is moving along, and he's doing, generally speaking, well, like the world after the flood. But there's one part, one little city, one Sodom, that's misbehaving. There's one pattern of behavior that's wrong, even if overall I'm going in the right direction. So maybe what's required now is not a complete overhaul where I become a whole new person, because generally speaking, I'm going in the right direction. But what's required now is just to cut out that behavior, cut out that pattern of negative behavior. And for that, there is judgment, at least according to one view. Whereas the other view says, even then, Rabbi Nechemiah says, even then, no judgment. Even for an individualized pattern of behavior, you can emerge as a new person. It's true, you may not have to go through a whole mikveh, like a whole flood experience where your whole life is in upheaval. But if a person truly cuts out that negative behavior, it's as if he emerged from a new person, as a new person, at least with respect to that behavior, and even then, no judgment. We might be able to suggest as well, with respect to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, disputing over the people of the generation of the desert and the people of Korach, whether or not they come back. So let's do one at a time. Let's start with the people of the generation of the desert, the people who died as a result of the sin of the spies. Chassidus explains that the sin of the spies were that the reason why they didn't want to go into the land of Israel is because they knew going to the land of Israel meant they would have to engage with the physical world, and they'd rather stay in the spiritual cocoon of the desert where they were fed by God. They had the clouds of glory, and they were living spiritual bliss. They were kind of spoiled. They were a spoiled generation spiritually, and therefore wanted to stay in that spiritual spoiled land. So in that sense, Rabbi Akiva says, look, you guys missed the point, and therefore you need to do a restart. No judgment, and no share in the world to come. You need to do a restart. If your life is such that you feel like you want to live in a spiritual cocoon and not engage in the world around you to elevate it, then you need to start over. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer is saying, you don't need to start over. Your heart's in the right place. Because it's not like an evil thing that the person wants to live in a spiritual cocoon. It comes from a good place. Just redirect that to realize that the ultimate purpose is not the spiritual cocoon, but to direct it into the physical world. And therefore, this person does not need to do a whole reboot, and therefore does have a share in the world to come, even if there's going to be maybe perhaps a judgment. Now, Korach, conversely, is actually the exact opposite. The way Chassidus explains Korach's argument is, Korach argued all people are holy, and therefore, why do we need a separate leader? That was the argument. He said, why do I have to have Moses as a leader if all Jews are holy? Why is there a hierarchy in spirituality? And Chassidus explains that the reason why Korach made that argument is because Korach felt, if the ultimate purpose is to engage the physical world, then why do we have to hang on to higher spiritual people? We all engage in the physical world. Why do I have to have a Moses, which is separate, above, more spiritual? So whereas the people of the generation of the spies made the mistake in thinking, forget the world around us, let's go into a spiritual cocoon, Korach's making the reverse mistake. If it's all about engaging the physicality, let's forget this whole spiritual thing. Forget this fact that we have Moses and a whole more spiritual people. Just get straight into fully engaging the physical world. And that too is a mistake. Because in order to engage the physical world properly, one needs to be connected to the spiritual life. If the mission is to transform the physical world, then I must remain separate from the physical world. Because if I am fully detached from spiritual life and become completely part of the physical world, I'm not part of the solution anymore. I'm part of the problem. So the Jew lives in this kind of balance, what Hasidic terms or Kabbalah terms, Ratze v'Shuv, the coming and the going. On the one hand, a Jew is not part of this world. He's connected spiritually. He has a hierarchy. There's a Moshe Rabbeinu, there's a tzaddik who's more spiritual, and he wants to attach himself to that spirituality. At the same time, he knows the reason why he's attached to this higher spirituality is because he needs to bring that spirituality into the physical. So don't make the mistake of the spies in completely spiritual, and don't make the mistake of Korach of completely only physical. There's got to be both, where I'm attached spiritually, and I bring that spirituality to engage the physical. So whereas Rabbi Akiva says, if you're making either of these mistakes, you've got it wrong, reboot. Like the generation of the flood, who had to go through a complete transformation. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says, whether you're Korach, and you want to engage the physical only without remembering your spiritual connection, or whether you're from the spies where you want to engage fully spiritually and not engage in the physical, in either of those cases, yes, you're missing a very crucial point, but you're not completely out of it. Your heart's still in the right place. In both of these cases, the mistake doesn't come from a sense of evil, like the degenerate generation of the flood, but it comes from a place of mistaken spirituality. And therefore, there's no reason to reboot, just redirect, go through a judgment. So this is a suggested reading, and of course, as always, the floor is open. Please comment and let us know what you think. And we hope you're all doing safe, and we hope, God willing, that we enter into the promised land indeed, with God's help, with Mashiach's coming maybe without delay.